My previous session, I talked to you about the use of graphs, about proofreading your presentations before you actually do your final presentation. Today I would like to conclude this series on presentations by telling you how you would handle your audience and what you need to do in a question answer session. Every presentation concludes with a question answer session. So you need to be mentally prepared to answer questions put forward by your audience. People seek clarifications, people want to give you suggestions, and you need to be open to accepting these ideas. Now, how do you tackle an audience when they ask you questions? This is one of the aspects I'd like to talk to you about. But before I conclude, I would like to talk to you about what your conclusion or your last slide should all be about. Your concluding slide should be winding up on all the important points that you talked about in your presentation. Usually the concluding slide has three main points that relate to your presentation overall. So what are the 3 points? You need to identify these 3 points right at the beginning of your presentation and keep going back to them again and again, reminding your audience of what you were actually talking and how you're linking all your ideas to these 3 points. The point in having identifying these 3 ideas is simple. When your audience goes back after the presentation and they are asked, what was the presentation about? The audience actually goes back with only 3 main ideas. This often happens because the human mind can retain 3 main ideas during a presentation. Maybe more for some of them, but usually 3. So make sure that your audience knows what those 3 points are. That is the first homework you have to do. So you start with the conclusion before you actually start your presentation or preparing the subject matter of your presentation. Now, to make your conclusion leave a lasting impact on your audience, you need to make it effective with a strong closing. What do I mean by a strong closing? I would like to liken this thought to a garment that you get stitched by a tailor. When you get clothes stitched by a tailor, he generally ties all the knots and gives you the final product after cutting off the extra threads. That is what you are also essentially expected to do in your presentation. You've talked about so many things. Now cut out the extras and tell us what you want us to know exactly. What are those 3 points that you want us to remember when we go out of the room? When somebody tells me, oh, was this what he talked about? You should be able to say, yes, this, and maybe other things also, 2 other points. So make sure that you leave room for suggestions, clarifications, and also close with an assertion that this is what I wanted to talk to you about, and I think I have successfully done it. Now, your conclusion slide should therefore summarize the main points of your presentation and also suggest future avenues of research. Now, this is where a discussion can take place apart from clarifications with your audience. When your presentation is done, make sure that you are allowing your audience to ask you questions rather than closing the book and saying that I am done with you and it's time for me to leave. When people ask you questions, you are expected to have answers. But there may be questions that don't relate or is outside the purview of your presentation. So you need to be clear with your audience in case you cannot answer these questions. But when somebody asks you a question, you need to be honest and answer them to convince them that this is what you were talking about and give them a clarification. If you cannot give them a clarification right away, tell them honestly that I'm sorry, I cannot give you the answer to this question right away, but I will get back to you as soon as possible. Now, if such questions keep arising often and you're not able to answer questions, it might have a negative effect on you as a presenter or as a speaker. It implies that you have not prepared your presentation or your talk very well. So what you can do is, if you want to save your skin, at times involve the audience to answer your questions. Maybe you look at your audience and tell them, look at them, you might find that somebody has the answer. So you might tell him that, would you like to answer my question? Please feel free. But don't adopt any of these strategies too often. Now, there are times when your audience can fall asleep. How can you keep your audience awake? Again, there are a few strategies that you can use. Use anecdotes, tell them stories, give them examples, Alright, and in spite of that, if you feel your audience is falling asleep, you really need to work up on that. What you can do occasionally is keep 2 or 3 minutes, 2 seconds silence, not minutes, sorry. Remain silent for 2 or 3 seconds and then just wait to see what the audience is doing. You will find that they automatically wake up and start asking each other, what happened, why the silence? Each one wants to know what is happening, where have I gone off track, and therefore it lessens your work because they have started discussing with each other on what you were talking about. This makes your work easier. Alright. Sometimes you have an audience or people in the audience who like to draw your attention and keep saying, I have a question, I have a question, I have a question. Now you need to give a fair chance to all of them in the audience to answer your questions. If you find them troublesome, be gentle and tell them that I'll get back to you after his question. And if he's still insistent and troubles you too much, you have to be a little firm and tell him that I will answer your questions at the end of the session when the others have finished. That's a very nice or diplomatic way of saying that I'm listening to you and I will also address your queries or clarifications after the session is over. You will not gain anything by angering your audience or making them displeased, so make sure that they leave with a happy mind and know that what you've said is something that they've liked, they've enjoyed, and have gone back with some kind of knowledge that they did not have. So the first purpose of doing your presentation is starting from a familiar ground, as I said before, and taking your audience on to something that is unfamiliar. Why? Because they have come to know what they don't know. And your conclusion should actually be winding up on these things that they did not know, so that it leaves open space for or opens up avenues for future discussion and research. Now, when you leave the room after your presentation, make sure that you ask your audience a question which they will think about, and then they will get back to you if necessary. So these are some of the strategies you use for a presentation when you conclude. Now, before you do your presentation, make sure that you've practiced your presentation over and over again with the time allotted to you. Remember, it is always nice to finish your presentation 2 minutes or 5 minutes before the time given to you, and never even 1 second after the time allotted or given to you. If you finish your presentation 2 minutes before the time allotted, remember your audience will bless you. But a second after the time allotted to you can become troublesome and make your audience restless and curse you. That's all for today with presentations. Thank you.